What does great world building actually look like? Is it about complex magic systems, intricate maps, carefully explained histories? If you asked 1,000 writers, you'd probably get 1,000 answers. And yet, sometimes the stories that resonate most, the ones that feel the richest, the most alive, don't explain much at all. Take the Apothecary Diaries, a series that spends more time in tea ceremonies and cold gossip than in grand narratives. Or Frieren, a story set in the aftermath of an epic quest, where the world isn't explained, it just exists, quietly. Or Dungeon Meshi, where everything is explained, down to how monster meat cooks. But it never feels like exposition. It feels like a world that's been living long before we arrived. These stories could be more different in tone, pacing, or scope, and yet they all work. Not because they follow the same rules, but because each one breaks them, in its own quiet, deliberate way. This isn't a breakdown of how to do world building correctly. It's about how world building feels when it's done right, and why the quietest choices often leave the loudest echoes. Let's start with a story that says the least, and somehow tells you everything. Before the Apothecary Diaries became a breakout hit, it was building one of the most intricate and grounded historical settings in anime. Not a fantasy world with magic and monsters, but a palace soaked in ritual, hierarchy, and quiet brutality. A place where power isn't loud, but subtle, where appearances matter more than facts, where the wrong scent, the wrong dish, the wrong word can kill someone, not with swords, but with poison. The story is set in an empire, clearly inspired by Imperial China, but without claiming full historical accuracy. Instead of historical reenactment, it focuses on mood, routine, and the slow, suffocating weight of court life. The inner palace is its own ecosystem, sealed off, policed by rules and expectations no outsider understands. Most people here are trapped. Concubines, eunuchs, maids, nobles. Even the powerful can move freely. They all smile, bow, and lie through their teeth, because that's the only way to survive. And this world doesn't explain itself. There is no narrator walking you through customs or politics. You learn by watching, by noticing, and slowly you start to see the invisible system that keeps everything running and everyone in line. That's why the story works so well through Mao Mao's eyes. She's not supposed to be here. She wasn't raised to obey this world's rules. She doesn't care about power or status or tradition, which makes her the perfect person to question everything. And even though the show is centered on her, it's really about the world around her. How fragile it is, how easily it can be poisoned, and how often it runs on ignorance. Mao Mao doesn't solve mysteries to prove a point. She is not some crusader. She's just curious, stubbornly, obsessively curious. And that's what makes her dangerous. Not the palace itself, but to the illusion that everything inside it is under control. Most of the time, she's just trying to keep her head down. But her mind never rests. She observes, connects, deduces. When others see coincidence, she sees cause and effect. When others accept misfortune, she asks full benefits. And the more she figures out, the more obvious it becomes that the palace runs on a kind of fearful blindness. Things happen because no one wants to ask why. The show doesn't make a spectacle out of these realizations. There is no dramatic music or gasps of shock. It's quiet, clinical. You watch the implication land slowly on Mao Mao, on the viewer, and that restraint is part of the show's power. It trusts you to keep up. It respects your intelligence. Even the aesthetics reflect this. The palace is beautiful, but the beauty feels heavy. Everything looks curated, staged. It's not there to enchant you, it's there to control the people inside it. Gold-trimmed cages, silken disguises. You start to understand that nothing is soft here, even if it looks that way. And that's where the Apothecary Diaries does something rare. It makes the setting feel alive, not just as a background, but as pressure. Every decision, every interaction is shaped by the system in place. Social rank, superstition, misogyny, fear. And rather than challenge those systems head-on, the story shows us what it takes to survive them. The Apothecary Diaries builds is what could be called a systemic world. A narrative environment governed less by lore or spectacle, and more by institutions, social codes, and invisible rules. This is world building through implication, not exposition. The setting operates like a closed circuit, self-sustaining, opaque to outsiders, and hostile to interference. Stylistically, the show aligns with what you might call procedural realism, not in the sense of mimicking real history, but in how it prioritizes routine, casualty, and institutional logic. The drama doesn't come from plot twist, but from watching a character gradually map the system she is caught in. It's less about escape and recognition, realizing how that world works and what that understanding costs. That's why it sticks. It's not just about Mau Mau's cleverness or medical trivia. It's about watching someone navigate a world that is constantly trying to box her in, without ever pretending she can break out of it completely. She's not there to change the system. She's just trying to live in it without going blind. And strangely, that quiet defiance of surviving a world that doesn't care if you disappear echoes in another series. One that trades poisons for passage and palaces for ruins. But at its core, Frieren is asking something just as heavy. What do you do with a life that keeps moving, long after everything you knew is gone? Frieren opens where most stories stop. The heroes return, the Demon King is dead. Peace for once seems possible. There is a celebration, and then everyone goes home. But for Frieren, the elf mage who outlives them all, the end is just the start of something else. Not another grand quest, not some secret threat, just time. And a terrifying, endless stretch of it. The show doesn't rush to fill that time. It lets it sit. Decades pass in seconds, people grow old, cities change. And Frieren stays the same, detached, reserved, always a little elsewhere. Not because she's cold, but because she never had to care. Mortals were fleeting, their lives didn't seem worth learning. But when one of them, Hyter, asks her to raise an apprentice, something shifts. Slowly, quietly, as if grief was ignorable, had finally found a way in. What makes Frieren so strong isn't that it deals with death, but how it handles what comes after. It's not a tragedy, it's not about pain, it's about the mundane aftermath. The dull, persistent ache of knowing you missed your chance to know someone until it was too late. There are fights, sure, demons, dungeons, spells, but those are just textures. The real weight of the story is in memory, in old places revisited, in conversation that should have happened decades ago, in realizing that what seemed like a meaningless moment mattered deeply to someone else. And Frieren, for all her power, is helpless against that. She can cast ancient magic, survive battles no human could, but she can't rewind. She can't reveal what she once ignored. So instead she starts paying attention. She listens more, watches more, learns the small details of the people around her, their quirks, their fears, their hopes. She doesn't always know what to do with that knowledge, but she holds on to it because she finally understands it won't last. Especially with Fern, stern, capable, and perceptive in ways that sometimes even Frieren isn't. Their relationship isn't loud or sentimental, but it's everything. A second chance, not to save the world, but to understand it, to care this time, while there is still time. The show mirrors that restraint. It rarely tells you what to feel. It doesn't score emotional scenes with swelling strings or underlying revelations. It trusts you to notice the changes, how Frieren's posture softens, how her eye linger, how her silences grow warmer instead of colder. In terms of form and style, Frieren is a contemplative fantasy. It borrows the frame of a classic RPG world, towns, quests, magic, but drains it of urgency. The narrative isn't plot-driven so much as elegiac, shaped by intervals and absences. This is a fantasy world post-epic, one where time itself becomes the antagonist. The style is spare and observational, with long silences, minimal exposition, and the trust in visual storytelling to do the emotional work. It's less about what happens and more about what doesn't, what's forgotten, what's missed, what quietly lingers. And like the Apothecary Diaries, Frieren treats its world as more than background. This isn't just another fantasy landscape. It's a place shaped by memory and time. Ruins aren't just level design. They are remnant of lives, of choices, of people who once stood where our characters now stand, asking the same questions, fearing the same things. That's why the journey matters even if there is no great war looming. Every village they pass through, every story they hear, becomes part of Frieren's reconstruction of what it means to live. Not as a hero, not as an immortal, but as someone trying, finally, to understand the people she once outlived without ever really seeing. There is no big speech, no moment where Frieren breaks down and explains how she feels. Her growth happens in half smiles, in paused footsteps, in lessons passed to Fern that sound suspiciously like regrets, reframed as wisdom. Because that's what this is. Not redemption, not resurrection, but reconciliation. With the past, with loss, with the quiet realization that even if you have centuries left, some things happen only once. And just like the Apothecary Diaries, Frieren is a story about survival, not in the dramatic sense, but the emotional one. What do you hold on to when time takes everything else? What makes life matter if the world forgets it? Sometimes the answer is simple. You remember, or you make something with your hands, with what little you have, in a place where nothing is supposed to grow, where most people only see masters and death, and somehow it still tastes like home. Dungeon Meshi should have been a gimmick. What if fantasy adventurers cooked and ate the monsters they fought? It sounds like a one-joke premise, fun for an episode, forgettable after 3. But it's not a gimmick. A dense, thought-out, fully operational world built around food, survival, and the eerie logic of dungeon ecology. It turns a classic RPG setup into something stranger, funnier, and way more thoughtful than you'd expect. Because every monster has rules, every floor has systems. The dungeon isn't just a setting, it's a living thing. It adapts, reacts, reshapes itself. It has its own rhythms, hierarchies, even its own logic of reincarnation and memory. And the way the story explores that isn't through exposition, it's through cooking. Recipes aren't just cute details, they are how we learn how things work. Which monsters are poisonous, which parts are edible, how heat behaves underground, how certain fungi reacts to light, how mimic meat needs to be soaked to remove bitterness. It's a world you understand by engaging in it, not through prophecy or lore drops, but through knives, spices, and trial and error. The genius of Dungeon Meshi is how it flips the fantasy power fantasy on its head. It's not about slaying dragons and leveling up, it's about resourcefulness, curiosity, respect for the environment even when it's trying to kill you. The food isn't a punchline, it's a tool for survival, a lens that reframes danger as discovery. And like Apothecary Diaries and Frieren, it trusts the viewer to keep up. There is no narrator walking you through dungeon mechanics, no labeled maps. You figure it out by watching, by noticing patterns, by seeing how rules break and why. The show builds its world the same way you learn it, bite by bite, clue by clue. Underneath it all is a subtle, creeping strangeness. The dungeon isn't just a backdrop, it's a force, something ancient and mythic, but never explained outright. The deeper they go, the more everything starts to blur. Biology, memory, identity, but the tone never tips into melodrama. It stays grounded through the physicality of food, the ritual of cooking, the weird comfort of the mundane. What ties Dungeon Meshi to Apothecary Diaries and Frieren is that same narrative confidence, that belief that the world itself can carry meaning, that systems matter, that quiet details are more powerful than loud declarations. These shows don't shout, they simmer. They ask you to observe, to think, to put pieces together on your own, and that's what makes them unforgettable. Where most fantasy stories focus on power, Dungeon Meshi focuses on process. It starts with a ridiculous hook, what if adventurers eat the monsters they fought, and turns it into a fully functional, detail-rich ecosystem. Everything has logic, everything has consequence. You're not just watching heroes get stronger, you're watching them adapt, innovate, survive. And that is the brilliance. It reframes danger through curiosity. The dungeon isn't just a gauntlet, it's a puzzle, a living thing. Every floor a new biome, every creature a new challenge, every meal a test of both knowledge and nerve. It's not about glory, it's about understanding. But what keeps it grounded isn't just a system, it's their characters. Their goals aren't cosmic, they are human. A lost sister, an old guild, a question about what comes after death. And all of that gets filtered through the act of cooking, of feeding each other, of surviving together. Like Apothecary Diaries and Frieren, Dungeon Meshi respects the quiet stuff. It builds tension to restraint. It doesn't rush. It doesn't overstate. It gives you just enough to figure it out if you are paying attention. No exposition dump, no emotional spoon feeding, just patterns, subtle changes in tone and rhythm that hint at something deeper. Because what it's really doing, beneath the fantasy trope, the weird humor, the beautifully animated meals, is slowly revealing a philosophy. Survival isn't just a matter of strength, it's about care, attention, respect, for the world, for others, even for the monsters you eat. What makes these stories stick isn't spectacle. It's not because they are the loudest or the most dramatic. It's because they trust you. They treat you like someone who pays attention. None of them hold your hand, they don't explain every rule, spell out every theme, or stop to tell you how to feel. You learn by watching, by noticing, and in that space between what's said and what's left unsaid, something deeper takes root. The Apothecary Diaries show the world running on silence and secrets. Frieren makes you feel like time passed like a wind through your fingers. Dungeon Meshi teaches you how to survive one bite at a time. They all ask the same thing: look closer. And that's why I love them. Because when the story lets you fill in the gaps, it doesn't just stick with you, it becomes yours. You start imagining how it works beyond the frame. You start thinking about how you'd survive, what you would notice, what you would miss. It becomes a place you live in just a little. These shows don't just entertain, they activate something. They remind you that stories don't have to scream to be powerful. Sometimes the quiet ones hit the hardest. And maybe that's why people connect with them so deeply. Not because they explain everything, but because they don't. They let you wonder. If you want to dive even deeper into beautifully built worlds, I got a video on one of the most overlooked gems in anime, Orb on the Moments of the Earth. It's quiet, strange, and unforgettable. And if you like the shows we told about here, I think it will hit you just as hard. Click here to check it out, like, subscribe, goodbye.